Welcome to the Poetry Podcast with A, an Amber Michelle's work production. Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to another Thursday episode. Today, we are going to dive into a question that I get a lot. It's kind of funny of just how many people ask this broad question, and I love meeting people one-on-one, talking in depth about this, but I've probably had about 10 coffees with people this year that always bring up this question, which is a broad question. So I thought it would be good to bring it up here and point people to this episode if they ever have a question on how I wrote my first poetry book. Oh, I wanted to actually grab a copy of the book. It's just sitting right over there. So it was easy. Yeah, I wanted to grab a copy of the book just so I could feel it, have it in my hands. My favorite copy of my book is my hardcover. Just like, listen to this. I love it. Compared to like the paperback. Lame, right? The hardback, baby. Little drum roll. Oh, my dog just thought someone was knocking on the door. That's how hard this bitch is. Okay? So yeah, I am going to use this episode to talk about how I wrote this book because I really do get asked that a lot. And it kind of surprised me of how many people have asked me, but looking back at my process, I asked a lot of people how they wrote their books. So it makes sense. I think in this life, we're always just grabbing inspiration from people we know. And so I am just so willing, again, so open to talk about my process because now that I'm writing my second book, it's such a different process, which is interesting. So I'm just going to go way back to the beginning when this idea started to like conceive in my mind. So in 2020, I was really battling with addictions towards alcohol, drugs, and it was just starting to really control my life. And since it was so controlling in my life, I knew I needed to switch. But it was just really hard to have such discipline when you had a lack of discipline before. But my sister really encouraged me to go to therapy, of course, right? It's always starts with therapy. So she had recommended therapy years prior, and I attended and I went to therapy, but nothing changed because I wasn't in it. But at this point in 2020, there was so much going on in our world. Obviously, it was 2020. And I could even recognize within my own self, I'm like, wow, I am drinking a lot. I would even just like on work days when I was working, I was like drinking early in the day. So that's when I just really knew it was a problem when I would like wake up and drink on a work day. I was like, okay, this is bad. So when I went to this new therapist, I really connected with her and I think the reason why I connected with her, not saying that, no, this is probably the reason why. I was going to say, it's not that I wasn't open in the past, but in the past I wasn't open. Like when I was going to that therapy session, I knew I was going to be drinking like immediately after. And it would be like almost an excuse to go drink after the therapy session. It's like, oh, okay, I did it. Now let's have fun. You know, there's always an excuse to drink. And with this therapist, I really opened myself up to the experience of hearing her feedback and stuff. So I think that made a huge difference. Anyway, in 2020, we really started to attend a lot of sessions together, and she kept bringing up the fact that I needed to seek AA. And I was like, no, I can't do AA. Like, I can't do AA. And the reason why I had such a shield up against AA is because I feel that I was feeling imposter syndrome of being an alcoholic or being an addict of any kind, because addiction runs deep in my family. And I was like, me compared to them? No, I can't go to AA. I would be a fool to go, even though I really was struggling with it. So that was number one thing. And just the fact of being called an alcoholic, I was so afraid of that word. And it's not, I don't really love the word now, especially that I've done so much research on alcoholic behaviors, that I really don't love the term, even though, for lack of a better term, that is what you could say I was or am, whatever. So once I was going to therapy and she recommended that, I was like, absolutely no, I can't, I'm not going. But I'm still willing to change and willing to commit. I just don't want to go to that practice. Also, I had such a deep connection with my spiritual life already, and I know that in AA there's a strong tie to religion or faith, which I already had. So I'm like, I don't know how this new faith, I'm not switching my faith or religion. I'm very strong in it. So it was this weird thing. I'm like, I'm a Gemini. I like to pray and I like to party. So I don't see how praying more is going to help me party less, because I already pray a shit ton. So those are just some of the reasons why AA was just not going to be on my radar. And so she said to me, every time you drink, how about you write? And she did know that, like, I love to write. I grew up writing. I always was writing songs. I minored in poetry in college. Just, it was something that was really important to me. Throughout my life, I just loved lyrics or verse, psalms. I just loved those. So she knew that, and she's like, this would be a good start for you. And I was like, okay. And that's exactly what I did. I was like, I like that idea. So I actively was just started to write a lot, especially at that time in 2020. I was really going through some dark phases of my life. So I was really using the pen as a therapeutic outlet to release that darkness out of my body. And beyond that, I just started to hang out with a different crowd. I joined a writing group. I joined a yoga studio, and also just spent a lot of time to myself, time in nature. There was this one like rose garden that I went to a lot. I love roses. So things like that, I just really started to cultivate in my life. And so at this point, I'm not writing a book, but this is where this idea was born. It was born out of my curiosity to change my life. And I think that's how you can get an idea to write your first piece, is start to get curious about something. Or if you've already written books and you want to write another one, to write something new, you almost have to go out and get curious about whatever there is in life that has to offer you, really. Like, what does life have to offer you? Get curious about it, and then a new story can get born. So that's really how I feel like I started. I was making this huge lifestyle change, and I was using writing to get through the really tough moments. And then I'm trying to think, like, I can't remember her name, but there was this girl from my hometown, and she had a poetry book. And I just like saw it on Instagram, and I messaged her and I was like, wow, this is really cool that you put your story all together. I think it was about like an abusive relationship, but I thought it was really beautiful, and it was really the look of it, that cover art, the illustrations throughout the book. It was very, very beautiful, and it didn't look self-published. And even though it was self-published, and I was like, I can do that. I have all these poems, and I have this really strong story that has been helping me get through. And it was like I was writing this piece for me and no one else. So that was really cool. I was just writing a story for my own self. I don't think you really should write books for anyone else. I think you should write them for yourself, because you don't need pressure on yourself when you're writing. You need to write for you, bottom line. And so when I saw this woman's work and I bought her book, I read it, I was like, wow, I can do this. I had made books in my past because I was working on this marketing team, and one of my to-dos, or like one of my tasks, was to make a book for the company. So like I knew how to use InDesign. That was encouraging. I'm really proficient in Adobe products. So I just knew how to do like an outline of a book. So that was encouraging. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm going to put this into a book. And I really started to think of names. I played around with a lot of names. And then once I really honed in on one, I started to talk about it with people. I started to be like, yeah, I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book. And at this point of the process, all my poems were pretty much dark and about my addiction problems. So it was a lot. It started off very heavy, the process. And then I came up with this theme. So I had the idea of like my sobriety journey, a poetic memoir towards sobriety. But then I kind of cultivated this theme around that, which was like the seasons of sobriety. I'm from the Midwest, so I felt like every season was really influencing the season that I was in. So then I started to go back to these poems and pull like, okay, that would go in a chapter for winter, which is a chapter that's really focused on the addiction and darkness. But this poem is kind of about a relapse. So maybe it could go for autumn when it talks about renewal and how to re-find yourself if you fall down. So I started to categorize the poems in that way. But then I was like, okay, maybe there's not enough in here for a full book. So I did have to go back and like write. And then once I felt like I had enough poems in each chapter, I hired an editor. And when I was with this editor, I felt like she gave me such good feedback. She's an amazing writer herself. And we got through the process and she was like, I think you're ready. But there was something in me that was telling me it wasn't done yet. And that was just a gut instinct. And I believe in gut instincts more than anything in my life. I swear by my gut instincts. So I chose to listen to it. And I was talking to one of my mentors that is my mentor in business. And I was talking to him about this book. I mean, he's read a lot of my poetry. He really believes in my poetry. He thinks it's really good work. And he gave me a friend of his who he used to run businesses with in the past, who has written multiple poetry books and is also a professor out in Miami, that he was like, how about you send your work to him and like see what he has to say? And I sent him the work. And his response to, and he knew of me because he knew of my business that I was running in the past. And so he was like, you're very successful, but like this book is not ready. He's like, I won't even look at this book yet. So I was like, what? This girl told me that it was ready to be published. I wanted like just another a couple eyeballs on it. But he's like, I won't even look at it. And at first I was really taken back by that comment. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's done. It's done. But he's like, it's not done. And he gave me all these tips. He gave me books to read. And he was like, how about you just read these books? Here's some tips and advice. If you want to publish this book, go for it. Go ahead. Go out there and do it. But I will not be involved. If you want to go back and rewrite and have me re-look at this book, I will. But you have to go back and do some work on your own first before I'll even look at it. And I was like, damn. So it took me a minute to really be like, okay, I'm going to change the book. And I think the biggest things that I changed was the form of the poems. Before, I had just no punctuation, no proper grammar inside the poems. And I really felt like I started to do that because first I was a little intimidated by grammar, and I saw that there was a lot of popular poetry books that do that, like free form or whatever it's called. And like, especially like Rupi Kaur's form. But then I was actually at one of Rupi's shows when she was on tour, and she made a comment of why she wrote like that. And she had a purpose to why she wrote in that way. And I was like, I don't really have that purpose. Like, there might be people reading this book who aren't super big into poetry, you know? And I love poetry. I really do. But sometimes I can get lost in people's poems. And that was something I didn't want people to do with my work. I didn't want people to get lost inside the poems. I wanted them to be poetic, of course, storytelling, of course, but simple. I wanted people to really catch the meanings because that was the main part. I didn't want people to get lost. So I read these books. I learned a lot about grammar, and I changed my book. I really changed the whole structure of it. I rewrote every single poem, and I have 4 chapters, one for each season, and inside each one I have like 25 to 30 poems. So it was a lot of work to go back and rewrite the whole book, but I had to do that in order to feel confident in what I wanted to put out. And that's the most important part. I didn't feel confident with the first editor, and then like I almost needed more no's in my life, I felt like. And then with the second editor, he gave me more no's than I knew what to do with. So I was like, that actually feels right. I really wanted someone to guide me and help me figure out what my message, what I'm trying to do. Because again, I didn't write this book for anyone else but me. So trying to write it for people to read was a challenge at first, but it was so empowering. I learned so much that I was like, wow, okay, this is something I really want to do. My pup, I'm sure you can probably hear his little claws tapping on the ground right now. Hi, Murph. He's just watching me. He was in one of my other episodes. He was sitting here right before I started to record, he jumped down. I'm like, no, you're like my little buddy that I can cuddle. But okay, sorry. Yeah, so that's really where it was. Okay, so 2020, idea was born. I started to surround myself with a community that was going to support what I was getting curious about. I was getting curious about sobriety. I surrounded myself by those people, and I was getting curious about writing, surrounded myself with those people. 2021, I was still just going through it. I was mostly sober throughout that year, but there were times where I would like have a bad day and like go through a relapse, whatever. My thing was like what I used to always do if I saw like a bottle, I would just be like and then set it down. And I'm like, no, it's not me. Okay, good. But it was like I wasn't even getting drunk off it, but I was like impulsely just being like, so that was something. And like my poems were still really dark. And that was another thing that second editor told me. He was like, these poems are so dark that I feel like you need to write about being enlightened and talk about you talk about not being sober a lot. You need to talk about being sober, like the story arc. He really like this hope for people. He's like, you need not even hope for people, but it's just like, what was the hope for you? So write about that. That was a really good piece of advice. And I was like, honestly, like I've been relapsing like every couple months, like, and I think that's holding me back. And he was like, okay, well, you know what to do. So I really just had to change even more about my lifestyle. So I stopped watching TV. I really narrowed down on who I was spending time with and hanging out with. And I focused on being active. I really got into visualization and meditation. I do think visualization can be a part of your meditation. So I was like visualizing on a daily basis of what my day would look like and envisioning it without alcohol. And that would really set me up for success, especially because just in business, there's business, family, friends, there's always alcohol around. So I would envision like people drinking around me, but me drinking water and still smiling and being happy and having a good day. So I started to really nail down that. And once I did that, I was almost living in this space of like the tortured poet of like, if I give up alcohol and drugs and all these things, I feel like I'm going to lose my creative edge. Like, where are my stories going to come from? I had no idea, but it was so wild that I had more of an open mindset. I had more clarity, and poems really came to me that much more being sober. So that kind of just like wise tale of, your art being so connected to these, like creativity is born in the bottom of the bottle. That's not true. And like that was a myth that I put to rest by fully being sober. So I just started to really then write, I would say like in 2021 and 2022 about my sobriety journey. So it was like I was in the beginning years, I was writing about not being sober. And then I was really writing about being sober and being enlightened and how I was feeling from that. And then in 2023, the book was actually published. So I would say that in like the beginning of 2023, because I published it in November, that last hurdle I had to go through was like, I feel in the beginning of the year, I was like, okay, the book is done. I would have a few tweaks here and there just because you can't help yourself. But I was like, this is done. It's like done is perfect. And I was feeling good about it. I was getting great feedback from my second editor because I did rewrite the book. I did give it to him and he was like, wow, look at this. Okay, I got it. So he actually started to edit it and be an editor for me. And that was amazing. It really was. I learned so much from him. And I'm really happy he took me on because at first he wasn't willing. And then it just felt so good to have him come back and actually take me on. So he even was like, okay, I think it's done. And once he said that to me, I was like, okay. I kind of listened to this quote. I got this quote from one of my friends who also is a podcast host. She runs RD Friends, if you've ever heard of it. It's an amazing podcast with her. She runs it with Kara. They're both from my hometown. And one time they said, I can't remember if it was a podcast I was on of theirs, but they said, done is perfect. That has stuck with me through and through. And so I was finally like, okay, this is done. Because really, you could keep writing and writing your book forever if you wanted to. And I just wasn't going to do that. So I really wanted to get it out there because I really felt like this book was like my diploma. I think that therapy can be looked at like school, and writing was really my therapy when I was going through this process. And when I graduated from my therapy, I felt like my book was done. And when I was able to hit publish and get this into the hands of people who matter most, I was like, that's my diploma. This baby is the diploma. So I just really loved that concept. I think that writing is such a healing tool, and it's also just such a way to express yourself, that was kind of the concept of how I wrote this first book. I also wanted to say one other thing that really helped me write this book. I did not write this book every day. It took me a while to write this book. And I do think it's because I wasn't writing every day, but what I would do is I would go on solo trips. I would go to like a haunted house, or I would go to, or not a haunted house, a haunted hotel, stay the night there. I have a thing with haunted things, so that's why that worked for me. I know it's not for everyone. Or I would go to a forest and I would just observe and be so present. And I was just, throughout this process, when I was writing this, I was very observant, not necessarily, sometimes it would be around my surroundings, but when I was so observant around my surroundings, it made me very observant of what was going on internally. So it's like, don't just be observant about your external, be observant about your internal. And that is really something that I would think that helped me write the book. I would say I went on like 4 to 5 of those solo trips. I would tape up on the wall every poem. I'd print them out and I would tape up on the wall and rearrange them. And I would get room service. I wouldn't really leave unless it was out for a walk in a forest. And I would have no social media. Like, it was just a really good way for me to have time alone and sit with the book. And so that was really just how I started. And then towards the end of writing the book, when I was like, okay, done is perfect, it's done, it was still just in a Google Doc. The book was in a Google Doc. So then I had to switch to making it into book format. So this process might not be for everyone, but for me, I was running a business at the time. I was like, oh, I've been working on this book for so long. I just want someone to come in and help me put it all in a document, you know? Even though like I can go into the document, I can still make changes because I am proficient in Adobe. But I really just wanted extra hands, and it wasn't that expensive. It was worth every penny. I think I paid someone, it might be expensive for, I guess this is kind of expensive maybe, but it was like $500 to have someone come in and help me like put it all together. And I gave her all the dimensions. I researched what I needed the dimensions to be. And the way that I found those things out about like, how am I going to publish? Of course, I could have gone through like a publisher, but I was going through the process of wanting to go through a publishing company. And you have to fill out the forms online, and something about it was not sitting well with me because they just like ask you how many followers you have and all these things. And I think I was scared of getting a no from the publishing companies. And I have gotten some no's that I was just like, you know what? I don't want to wait on them. I want this to be out in the world. This book, it was meant for me. And whatever happens, happens to it. So that's why I decided to self-publish, was because I just wasn't ready to wait around and sit on this anymore. Because like I said, I wanted to frame my diploma. I felt super accomplished, and I wanted to just move on from this book. I wanted to keep going on with my life. I didn't want to keep holding on to it. I wanted to put it behind me a little bit. And I mean, it'll always exist in my life. I'll always talk about this book. It honestly was one of the best things I went through, especially through the self-publishing process, because I learned, again, just so much. So I think what I did when I was like, how do you self-publish? I'm pretty sure I used ChatGPT. I was like, how do you self-publish a book? And it gives you all these ways and ideas to like start like copywriting your book and getting an ISBN number for your book and buying a barcode for your book. So I would say those are the three things that I might be missing one, but those are the three things that I did first. I bought my copyright of Seasons of Sobriety, I bought an ISBN, and I bought a barcode. And this is just for the paperback. So you actually have to buy an ISBN for like paperback or a hard copy or an ebook. ISBNs can only be assigned to like one piece. So that's really how I started. I bought all that. And when I bought all that, I was like, this is just feeling good. It kept me motivated that like I knew I had my title, that I was like, okay, what company self-publishing route am I going to go through? Am I going to go through like a local bookstore or a local print shop and just buy a bunch of books and then sell them that way? But I didn't do that. I ended up going through the KDP, and there is such a negative connotation to the KDP. Like, people do not support the KDP, and I get it. I would say the reason why I did it though was because I liked the idea of someone just buying a copy of the book and then it being printed and sent. And you actually make more money off the KDP. Not that you make a ton of money selling books, because you don't, but the average of like your percentage is actually higher than probably most publishers, or like it was higher than Ingram. But the bad thing about the KDP is this negativity towards it from local bookstores or people who don't buy on Amazon. That is something that you really have to take into consideration, because that's something I didn't do. I wasn't fully aware of how hated the KDP was. So I actually went through the KDP to start, and then I also went through Ingram. So I had an alternative publisher. So I technically had like two self-publishing companies print my book for me. And I do have to say my experience with the KDP was easier because the customer support was really good. like you could call and talk to a real person. They'd stay on the line with you until your book was ready for formatting. Because usually when you upload your cover, it's like, these dimensions are off, warning. And then like with Ingram, my experience, it was still good. I still obviously got the job done, but their support is through email. So it takes like a day or two to have them email you back and like fix your problem, rather than the KDP, you call, you're talking to someone immediately on the phone. So you really just kind of have to weigh all your options. If I could go back and do it again, I might just do the Ingram route because of, again, just you have to kind of be aware of society and their feelings about how they're going to buy their books. And if no one's going to want to buy a book off Amazon, so KDP is Amazon's publishing house. So if no one's going to buy it off there, which I didn't really have that problem, everyone was pretty much willing to buy my book off of Amazon except for bookstores. Bookstores will not. I don't know of any bookstore that will buy a book off Amazon. If there is, let me know. But I mean, even the library who bought my book, they bought it off Amazon. So I don't know. I would say, which is also so sweet, shout out to the Kansas City Public Library for buying my book. I think that's like one of my favorite people that have ever bought my book, and you can go and read my book for free from the Kansas City Public Library, which I just think is the coolest thing. It was like a really proud moment that had happened. And so I guess after that, once you have decided that you're going to self-publish or go with a publisher, you make that decision, you cross all your T's, dot all your I's, get the thing published, then you have a proof. You have a proof of your book, and then you can see what it feels like in your hands. You can flip through the pages, and then typically there's one or two things or a handful of things that you want to fix. So then you can go back, fix it, get another proof. And then finally, you at one point just have to be like, this is the damn book. This is it. And this is what I'm going to be putting out there in the world. And feel good about it. It feels good to hold your book and have it in your hands. So make sure to celebrate those little wins that you got there, because there's so many people in the world that will say they want to write a book, but don't get to the finish line. And getting to the finish line is one of a kind. It is really an amazing thing that you can be proud of because you were disciplined enough to get through the process. And I don't want to say it's easy. It's not an easy process, but if you put your mind to something and you have energy and you're putting energy into it and you get it done, it does end up feeling, you look back on it and you're like, wow, I did that. Like, and it didn't kill me. Like that was easy. I'm still alive. Like if you're still freaking alive, then we're good. We have done it, So then after the book is out, you kind of want to be like, okay, how am I going to talk about my book? How am I going to sell my book? And a lot of artists, a lot of writers hate this part, which I completely understand. But there is a thing that you have to do. Like you really do have to use your resources, use your network to sell it, because your art deserves that much. It really does. So the last piece is really selling it. And I'll just talk from my experience of how I went about it. So I had kind of like a social media day where I was like, the book is out, go publish it. I was active on my socials. I used my email list that I have to push it out. I was on one of my favorite podcasts. I mentioned them earlier at Arty Friends. Those girls had me on their podcast, and I like made sure that it was timed up right when the release was going on. So I did things like that, like getting on other people's podcasts, using my email campaign, using my social media, and spreading the word about my book is out. So once that happened, I did like a full campaign of like book launch day. But then I would say like a couple weeks later, I had a book launch party. So my book launch party people said it was really unique. And the reason why they said that is because I had a really diverse group of people that I invited up onto the stage to read a poem about sobriety. And the reason why I didn't want myself just to be up on stage and reading is because the community that I surrounded myself really built me into the writer that I was. So I wanted to make it more of a night of like giving back to everyone and having this like open mic night for my audience to see the people that had shaped me. So that is why I had the open mic. And some people were new to me. I didn't know like everyone really well that I had up on stage. But the one thing that I will say, it was still reflective of a community of writers that I was around, especially in 2020, in 2021 weekly. So that is why I kind of had it that night. And I sold a lot of books that night. And then after that book launch party, I kind of died a little bit. I didn't talk about the book a lot, which I wouldn't recommend. I would recommend continuing to actively do readings. I did readings, but it was like sparingly, or I would be at events and have a booth at a table, things like that, which I will still do because it's fun just to meet new people. But I just really dove into my work of the business I was running. And I don't want to use life as a distraction, but it was, especially with the career I was having. I was just like, okay, I spent a lot of time focusing on getting this book out. It's out. Now I need to reshift focus fully back into my work. So I wasn't like super committed into like the marketing. And I stopped like posting on social media, which really hurt my algorithm. And I'm back on it now. I'm back to posting. I'm back to all of that, but life got in the way and I let life get in the way because life will always be a distraction if you let it. But I definitely let it be one. But it was so funny then out of nowhere, months later, when I wasn't even being active, there was a company who bought hundreds of copies of my book. And I was so surprised, but they bought each person in their staff a copy of my book. So that just gave me like a jolt of inspiration of like, wow, people, like it doesn't matter if it's been months, like people can still buy it and feel affected by it, and the word of the book can still get out. So I think my advice after the book is published and you're marketing it, do all the things, but just don't stop all the things. Like continue to talk about it for a good amount of time, like maybe for the rest of time. You can always go back to it. You can always talk about it, even when you're writing your next book. Like for me right now, I have a completely different process of writing my second book because this second book that I'm writing is a story that I wrote, or this is a story that had happened to me almost 10 years ago. So I'm really having, instead of like being super observant about like what's happening in my external surroundings. I'm having to like go back in my memory bank. I'm having to go back and read old letters and journals and look at old photos to really recall these memories and bring them out and draw from those artifacts and write this story. And I am having such a good time writing it. I think it's a story that could impact a lot of people, and I've never written about it. My journals, I was like, damn, I thought I wrote more about what was happening in my life during this time, but I really didn't. And that's kind of what happened with the sobriety thing too, is like when things are really going wrong or really bad, sometimes I stop writing. And this was kind of a period of my life that I wasn't writing that much, but I still have different artifacts that I'm pulling from. And I do have some journal entries that I can pull from and just natural memories. This story was such an impactful piece of my life, that it really shaped me, and it kind of made me go down the route of craziness with drinking and alcohol. So it's like going even farther back to why my life switched in that direction, which is something that I only found out through EMDR in therapy. So it is healing writing this next story, but it has a different approach. It is a novel, and it's a novel written in verse, which is some of my favorite poetry books to read is when it's like a poetic novel and it tells a fully complete story. So that is really interesting, to tell a story day by day in verse, rather than with this poetry book, my first one. It has a lot of prose in the beginning of each chapter, of like the description of what this chapter is about, and then it's these poems that all are connected to a theme, but it's not like one poem to the next relates to the same story. It relates to a theme, but it doesn't relate to each one individually, if that makes sense. But with this book that I'm writing, every poem is connected leading into the next. It like tells a full story, like the scenery, it's all centralized at one time and in one scene, I guess you could say. It's all based from a school that I attended my freshman year. And I'm doing a lot of character development, which that's something I didn't really have to do in my first book, but I'm telling a story about these people that I was surrounded by, and I'm making up names for them. Like my best friend in the book is named Honey, and that's not her name, but I always used to call her Honey Dip. So that was like the nickname I gave her, and I've been writing about her in this book, and I'm calling her Honey because she's sweet like honey, and she just has this beautiful golden presence about her. So yeah, the way that I'm doing this book differently, though, this is my second book in my writing process. I'm really new. I'm really early into it. So I'm going to be really excited just to continue to talk about this book journey, because it's different than my first one. And in my first one, I didn't even know I was writing it when I was writing it. So I didn't really talk about it. But with this one, I'm trying to write for 30 minutes every single day. And that has been life-changing. Like I feel like I'm getting more ideas the more I write about these topics. And the main way that I am writing this book differently is that I'm writing every single day. I'm taking time out of my day, about 30 minutes at least, to dedicate to writing on this book. And it's really been giving me some days like I can't write. My mind is foggy. It just isn't working. But then other days, but I'm still writing. That's the thing. I'm still writing though. And then the next day I will have so much inspiration. I will have so many ideas come to me. And for example, this morning, there you are, buddy. He's saying hi right at the end. Yeah. He's saying hi right at the end. This is Murphy. If you're not watching and you're just listening, Murphy just sat on my couch with me. He's literally my best freaking friend. Yeah. Okay. What was I was saying that, gosh damn it. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee because I'm losing train of thought. I've been talking for too long. So yeah, anyway, I wanted to say that like I need to keep this little notebook by me at all times because last night I again did this fucking thing. I'm pretty sure I talked about this last month. I was sleeping and I had this dream, and it was a memory of me and this person that I'm writing about. Right now, their name is Shadow in the book. So me and Shadow had this very intense, intimate moment, and I had a title for the poem. I wrote the poem out all in my mind, and I said to myself, I'm just not going to go up and get up right now. And I needed my notebook. I just needed to write down the title, and then everything else would have spilled out of me. But I can only remember one word. I don't even want to say the word because I don't want it to be weird. But it was only one word, and I remember this scene, but I don't remember how I wrote it so beautifully in my mind. So again, that's my fault. I didn't have my notebook by me. I don't sleep by my phone at all, so I can't write it in my phone. I had no way to wake up quickly and just write it down. And if I wrote it down quickly, then I probably would have gone back to sleep way quicker than I did, because the idea just kept stirring and I kept being like, should I go? Should I go get my notebook? But then I have to walk all the way downstairs and I don't know where it is downstairs, yada, yada, yada. So this is going to be my lifesaver by sleeping with this, because it is wild how many ideas come to me in the middle of the night. I am naturally a night owl, and I think that's why like my brain just is really active in the middle of the night. But now that I'm married, my husband wakes up really early. We like to go to bed. I just think it's really important to go to bed at the same time together. So he has to go to bed early for his schedule. So I go to bed early now. But there's something about the nighttime that calls me in, man. It calls me. So that is my thing that I'm really changing, is I'm keeping this little bitch, this little red notebook right next to my bed with me. Hopefully we can do a little check-in next week and see if there was anything that came to me in the middle of the night that I can share, because really that's where the best material is. But speaking of writing every day, I got to get my 30 minutes in. So I'm going to go do that. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Thursday, enjoy the weekend, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Leave me a review on your favorite listening channel, Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. Always with love, A.